Welcome back to Cruiser Motorcycles. Thanks for waiting for this video. Today, we will discuss the 5 most feared retro motorcycle myths. And we will reveal and break those myths with the facts we have learned. Motorcycles, especially vintage and retro models, have an undeniable appeal. They evoke images of yesteryear, rebellious riders, and a golden age of design. However, with all that nostalgia often comes a strong dose of myth and misinformation. From engine reliability to riding skills, there are a lot of misconceptions surrounding these iconic machines. Let's take a look at the top 5 retro motorcycle myths and debunk them once and for all. 1. Retro motorcycles are too unreliable for everyday use. Myth: older motorcycles break down all the time and aren't reliable enough to ride on a daily basis. Debunked. While it's true that older motorcycles require more maintenance than modern bikes, the idea that they're unreliable is a bit of an overstatement. Many vintage motorcycles are built with durability in mind and, when properly maintained, can offer reliable performance. Classic motorcycle enthusiasts often find that classic motorcycles, when cared for with the right parts and regular maintenance, can run just as smoothly as newer models. In addition, many retro motorcycle owners learn to repair their own engines, which helps improve reliability and understanding of the peculiarities of motorcycles. Old motorcycles may require more attention in terms of oil changes, brake pad replacement, and carburetor adjustments, but with proper maintenance, they can function reliably for everyday use. But the fact is that now, many motorcycle manufacturers are reproducing with new, more powerful engines without changing the classic model. So that the myth mentioned earlier can be broken. Even not a few enthusiasts choose retro motorcycles as their main choice. 2. Riding a retro motorcycle is dangerous and too hard to handle. Myth: old bikes are difficult to handle, dangerous to ride, and not suitable for beginners. Debunked. It's a common belief that retro motorcycles are difficult to control due to outdated technology or quirky design features, but this isn't necessarily true. Many vintage bikes have a straightforward design that can actually be easier to handle than some of today's high-tech machines. For example, retro bikes often have a simpler frame and fewer electronic components, which means less potential for something to go wrong. While certain models from the 1960s and 70s, such as the original cafe racers or chopper-style bikes, may require more skill to ride due to their stiff suspensions or slightly awkward ergonomics, they are far from impossible for experienced riders. Also, many retro models, like the Honda CB350 or Yamaha SR400, are relatively tame and beginner-friendly. With the right training and experience, retro motorcycles can be just as safe and enjoyable as any modern bike. 3. Old motorcycles are expensive to restore and maintain. Myth: the cost of restoring and maintaining a vintage motorcycle is prohibitively high. Debunked. While restoring a vintage motorcycle can be an expensive hobby if you go for complete overhauls with rare parts, the notion that it is always expensive is misleading. In fact, many classic motorcycles have a large aftermarket parts availability, and restoration can be done relatively affordably depending on the model and the extent of the work needed. For example, brands like Honda, Yamaha, and Kawasaki have a vast network of spare parts available, and some older motorcycles share parts with modern counterparts, making maintenance and repairs more accessible. Enthusiasts can often find affordable replacement parts, and many older bikes don't require complex systems that need specialized knowledge or expensive parts. Restoration costs vary depending on the model and level of customization, but with a little research, retro motorcycle ownership doesn't have to break the bank. 4. Retro motorcycles are more polluting than modern bikes. Myth: vintage motorcycles are far worse for the environment than modern motorcycles due to their outdated engines and lack of emission controls. Debunked. While older motorcycles don't have the advanced emission technologies found on modern bikes, it's a myth that they're all more polluting. Many retro motorcycles were built with a focus on fuel efficiency, and although they lack modern emission controls, their engines tend to be simpler, which can lead to fewer problems with malfunctioning parts that might cause excess pollution. Moreover, there is a growing movement within the vintage motorcycle community to preserve these bikes in environmentally friendly ways. Riders who love retro bikes often take pride in doing maintenance that keeps their engines running cleanly, including carburetor tuning and exhaust modifications. Furthermore, some vintage bikes can even be fitted with modern fuel injection systems or emission-compliant exhausts, reducing their environmental impact. '5. Retro motorcycles are hard to find and parts are obsolete. Myth: it's nearly impossible to find parts for old motorcycles, and they're essentially useless once a major component breaks. Debunked. This myth stems from the idea that because a motorcycle is decades old, parts must be rare and difficult to obtain. In reality, many vintage motorcycle models are still actively supported by a network of enthusiasts, dealers, and aftermarket parts manufacturers. Classic brands like Harley-Davidson, Triumph, and BMW have a rich history of preserving parts for older models, and even lesser-known bikes from smaller manufacturers often have parts available from specialty suppliers. Online forums, restoration shops, and salvage yards also provide valuable resources for finding parts that may seem hard to come by. If you're working on a bike from the 1960s or 70s, it's often possible to find original or reproduction parts, or even use parts from other models that are compatible. Vintage bikes might require some searching, but they're far from obsolete. The myths surrounding retro motorcycles often stem from misunderstanding the machines or relying on outdated information. When approached with the right knowledge, vintage motorcycles can be reliable, safe, and relatively affordable to maintain. For those who appreciate the history, craftsmanship, and riding experience of these bikes, retro motorcycles offer a thrilling and nostalgic alternative to modern machines. So, next time you hear one of these myths, remember, it's not always as bad as it seems.